Okay, so we're not going to get our app finished today, but that's okay because we can run into next week. So I've committed to get, so we've created our service, and our service is going to use dependency injection to work with our HTTP client. And when we make any HTTP calls, we're also going to be using this HTTP options for setting the content type as JSON. What else do we need to do? We need to modify our config. So I'm going to go right back to my root folder. We've got our globals. We don't really need the social API keys, but I'll leave them in there. But what we want to add is we need to add another global variable, which I'm going to call API URL. Or maybe I'll call it, API root. That's going to be our Express server address. So our service, it has to make calls to our API. Our API runs at localhost 3000/tasks. I don't want to hard code that path into all of the calls from the service, all the gets and all the posts. So we'll set it up as a global variable, and that way also if we publish this to a web server, we can put in the live server URL of the API instead. So now our service, we need to make a reference. I'll just save that file. All I've added is this. So we're going to make a reference to our config file in the service, and that way we have access to that path. So go back to service. So we're going to get API server path from config. Now we're way deep in the directory structure, so we've got to go back a long way. All the way back to oh, sorry, I want this to import. So I'll accept the change. So we're going to import globals. So that way we've got access to our API server URL. So now in my service, we'll write a get tasks method. So this method is going to call our API and return in JSON all the data. So notice the methods we have, because we've referenced the HTTP client library, we've got HTTP methods like delete, get, post, put. So we're going to call HTTP get, and it wants a URL. So now we can use our globals. API URL. And we want to make sure this is JSON, so we're going to provide our options. So this will set the content type. So we now have two versions of GET. We have the API version that uses Mongoose to talk to the database and go and get our tasks. We've got the service that lets Angular make a call to our API. Actually, I'm going to be a bit more, okay. Think if there's anything else we need to do. So we'll save. We won't see any data yet. But we haven't broken anything. Our page still loads. That's good. So we've kind of done these 4 layers. I think there's one other configuration piece we need. In order for our service to be able to use HTTP in our app module, we also need the HTTP component here. Our Angular app in general needs to know HTTP calls are allowed. So it's not set up here by default. So we're going to add HTTP client module to interact with server API. So we're going to import it here. We want the HTTP client module from Angular common HTTP. And we want to add it to the list of imports here. We've already got the browser and routing. That routing module came from our Angular setup when it asked, do we want Angular routing, yes or no? And we said yes. It imports this component. So we also want our HTTP client module. So we're getting there. So I think our service end is set up. We now need to get the Angular component. This never actually gets called. We have a service method that calls our API, but our component never actually invokes this. So there's nothing on the front end, just a title. So now we need to go to our component, app.component.ts. And we got to do the work to work with our service. So we're going to reference our task service and the observable class. So if our component's going to talk to our service, we need a reference to the service, number 1. Because we're going to use an observable object to call the service, wait for a response, and then do something, we need the observable class as well. Both of those are great. We haven't used them yet. We're gonna. And now in our component declaration, we're also going to add this. We're going to specify a provider, which is our task service. So the component gets its data and information from the service. The component doesn't talk to the API directly. It goes through that service layer. that we said earlier. It's optional, but it's recommended. We could call the Node API right from here. But everything you're reading about Angular will say, bad practice, don't do it. Too messy. Let the service do it. Have a good day, guys.
Oh, don't you need the,
Oh, I'm gonna grab all yours.
yeah.
Grab everyone else's.
Good call, Zach.
Yeah, it's really.
Yeah.
So we've now set it up so our component can talk to our service. Again, as we go through, it's always a good idea to keep checking the browser, make sure we haven't broken anything yet. So now inside our component, we're going to set up a tasks object, which is type any. So this is going to be a variable that we're going to populate from our call to the service. We need a constructor, so we're going to use a dependency injection here. So our component requires an instance of our task service. So we'll use dependency injection to provide the needed service to this component. Angular initializes the component. We want to automatically call the API to get all tasks. So whenever this component gets initialized, the user doesn't have to do anything to get the task list. It's already there right from the beginning. So we can call Angular, so ng. We're going to call the onInit method. And this is where we're going to use our service and our observable to call the get method and then populate a tasks variable with data. So we use our injected object. It has a get method, which we can call. And we're going to use an observable. We're going to subscribe. So basically, call the event and watch and wait for something to come back. And eventually, we're hopefully going to get a response. If we do, we'll log the response to the console. And then we'll populate our tasks variable. And this data is going to be JSON, right? Because our service set the HTTP options that are content type for both the request and response was JSON. So the service sends JSON to Node, Node sends back data in JSON. The component calls the service subservice takes in the request as an observable, and it sends back a JSON response. And then we can call, if we get an error, we can log it. I guess I don't really need the. So now we can try this. We'll see if we've broken our page. Okay, we haven't broken it. If we've done something wrong, we just get a blank page. This HTML file wouldn't even load. there was anything wrong. So that's a good sign. So we've now actually done most of what we need to do in our component. Right? Our component calls our service. It can handle an observable, and on initialize, it's making a call. In fact, if we look in the console now, if I refresh it, let's look in the console. So we don't see any data in the browser. Nothing's here yet. So let's add a bit of HTML to our task component.html. So we'll add a table. And we'll use the Bootstrap classes. And what we had is what we'll name. I guess these should be EH tags. Priority. Complete. Those should all be PHs. So then I'm going to use an Angular loop to try and display the task data. So we'll do tr with star ng4. So we will let a task of tasks. Tasks is the variable we declared in our component. Okay, doesn't like that. Let's see. We may need this. We may need our component to implement. I'm not sure if we do. We'll just try this. We may need to say implements on init. So that this gets called. And I think we need to make a new reference. There, we can add an import statement. It adds on init from Angular core. So I'll accept that, or I could just add comma on init up here. Okay. Let's see what happened here. We're getting closer. Our page loads, but we still have no data. There's nothing in the console. If we look in the browser console. Okay. It's not loading the favicon. We don't care about that. Promised resolve while context is inactive. We're getting warmer. So let's see why our because I'm putting all this in the wrong file. I'm sorry. And then the wrong component. I'm an idiot. This stuff needs to go in the task component. I did it in app component. App component's just the general one, so let's move that to task component, which already implements on in it. Okay. Yeah, whoops. Wrong file. I don't know why I can't copy and paste. So we want, I'll make my imports again. We want import task service and import observable. My provider should be for the task component. My constructor needs so we didn't want to do anything in app component. Sorry. Yes, we can take out. Sorry, so here is the task component, I think. Link to our service. Actually, we don't need, sorry, we need these in the service. I don't think we need them in the component. They're not being used in the component. Well, we'll see. Okay, so there's no data. What if we look in the console? Nothing in the browser console. What about in the web console? Do we have any data yet? No data, so this .task service is not a function. So we're getting close. It's calling our service, or trying to call our service. So we're referencing our task service. We're setting it up as a provider. Our constructor takes an instance with dependency injection. And on init is trying to call our service. There is one more issue. There is actually one more configuration thing. This may or may not be the problem. I think based on the error, that's not the problem. Just refresh it here. Okay, yeah, we don't get that error anymore. Well. Okay, why is it telling us this is not a function? Do we need the observable in a component? I don't think so. I'm still expecting to get an error. I'm just not getting the error I expected. We're exporting our class. We'll look at our service. We're not too far off. So why does it tell us our method isn't a function? Did I break my component? I'm just going to check my app component with an old one for a second. We'll have to stop and we can resume next. There's a quick fix for this. I'll give myself one more. Okay, I don't need a constructor here. The error I expect to get is a CORS error, a cross-origin request error. Okay. Cannot yet. That's interesting. So it's actually the wrong URL now. So sorry, I did have to remove the constructor from app component. It shouldn't have one. So now our issue is just that the path is wrong. Because if we look, it's calling localhost 4200 undefined / tasks. So that's not what we want. Maybe what I'll actually do here in my config is I'll put a / on the end. And in my service, I'll take the Okay, still not calling to the right place. I'm just going to try hard coding it for a second. Let's see. Yep, HTTP. If this is the case, we'll figure out the config part later. I'll hard code in the call to my API. Okay. So now it's calling, so we'll have to figure out the config variable, but it's saying cross-origin requests aren't allowed. Our API is not allowing localhost 4200 to make a request to localhost 3000. Ah, that would be why. Thanks, Brady. Let me put that back. Yes, that should be API root. Probably help if I use the same variable name. Would be a good idea. Thank you. So we have the cross origin request getting refused. All we need to do is modify our API to let other origins hit it, which is generally how APIs work, because we want some other application from somewhere else to be able to access our API. So in my controller, we can just configure, so allow cross origin requests. So if we call router.use, this means it's global, all functions will use it. So we have to set the headers. We want to control, allow, origin. I think if we put in HTTP, so if we allow requests from localhost 4200, so we're going to allow origin, and I need next in here as well. I know I'm keeping you over time, sorry. So we're going to allow get, post, put, delete, and options. That we call next. This should make our API, should enable requests from our Angular server now. So if I refresh, we shouldn't get a CORS error. No data yet, because we haven't written the code to actually display the data. Oh. Okay, we'll pause here. We'll finish it next week. Sorry for keeping you late.